This is The Bottom Line, a show designed to help Australian businesses succeed. On the show, you'll hear from leading Australian business owners as they share the lessons they've learned building their companies. You'll learn from their successes as well as some of the challenges they faced along the way. We also talk to experts from a range of fields who share specialised techniques you can use to improve your business. I'm your host, Sevan, and I'm a director at Alexander Spencer, and I'm really passionate about helping Australian businesses succeed. There's lots of ways for businesses to grow, but one way is to acquire a business. Today we're joined by Hish Kasem, the director of AS Mortgage Partners. Hish is an expert in business lending, and today he's going to dive deep into how you can borrow money to acquire business. We'll dive into what documentation the banks look for, what metrics they measure when they're assessing your loan, and Hish will take us through some stories of how he's helped his clients acquire a business through lending. Let's dive in. Hish, thank you so much for joining me on The Bottom Line today.
Yeah, it's nice to be here, Sevan. Good to see you.
So you're only around the corner in the office, a few metres down the road. You're part of the bigger group here at Alexander Spencer. You're director of AS Mortgage Partners. It's obviously excellent and great having you as part of the team. But for those that don't know who you are, and tell us a little about your story.
One of three siblings. So I got a younger brother and a younger sister. Grew up in an ethnic household. Parents were immigrants to Australia. My dad when he was about 20. My mother when she was actually more like 4 or 5. Yeah, really interesting household, actually, my household. So a lot of culture and because my dad's actually of a Muslim background, my mum's of a Christian background, and neither of them, they were happy to stay within their faiths. So I remember growing up celebrating something every 2 months, whether it was Eid or Christmas or Easter, and still to this day, it is the same. So I think that's quite unique. Mum was actually the main provider in the earlier years of our household because Dad was actually studying at university. A little bit unique, I guess. And yeah, so that's a bit about me growing up. Loved football, Aussie football, and football as in soccer. Still quite heavily involved in soccer. Used to play for quite some time. And these days I'm involved in a local club, which I absolutely love. Community work is great. There's a feeling you get from community work that is probably a little bit indescribable, I'd say. Yeah, so then I would say at about uni age, I went and did international trade, which was import-export. So not quite a lot to do with finance, but I got a job at NAB, which I actually did I think when I was about 16, I did something called work experience. I think that's what it was called. It's been a while. And I did it at NAB actually for 2 weeks. And I was just the boy photocopying paper pretty much. Not doing too much. But later on during uni, I got a job at NAB while I was studying. And first year, I sort of treated it as just earning some money to have fun with the boys and have a little bit of independence. Probably wasn't a lot of money back then. And then actually decided I think I like banking. And that's when I went down the path of many roles at a major bank. I'd say 10 roles during my 15 years there or thereabouts. And yeah, my last role there, I was working predominantly with brokers, or actually only with brokers exclusively. And I looked after a group of brokers. James, who is the managing director at AS Mortgage Partners, was one of those brokers. And we built a relationship and we helped many clients. And here we are.
It's an awesome story. So I can jump in there and because I'm a little bit involved there. I remember meeting you for the first time, Hish, where we were having lunch across the road and James is like, you got to meet this guy. He's an awesome banker. He's done like all of our, small business deals. And we're sitting at lunch, you probably remember. And I said, I looked across and I go, this guy looks, because I grew up in Noble Park North, which is just around the corner from, down North Dandenong. I tell you what, he looks familiar. Firstly, we probably look alike with the beard and the olive skin. And I thought, very familiar face. I said, Hish, what's your background? I said, to get that, find that connection. And then we ended up playing soccer at the same club. You're a bit younger than me, so you're in I can't remember which team it was, but you played at Brandon Park. Yeah, that's where you're heavily involved in. We're both heavily involved in there. Probably you more than me these days. And then we found that connection of playing juniors at the same club, which was awesome. And I think from there, James and I identified you as someone that we wanted to bring into AS Mortgage Partners. And the journey began. And I'm so glad you accepted the role at the time and accepted joining our directorship group here at Alexander Spencer and the wider group of companies. Because I know you had other offers at the time, so we probably pulled the trigger at the right time. Tell us about that. Tell us about that journey when we made the offer to you. What was that like? And you did have other offers. Why did you choose us, actually? I don't know if I've ever asked you that.
Because I was working exclusively with brokers and we formed really good relationships. So not just with James, there were other groups that I formed really good relationships with, and I obviously executed well for them. Because at NAB, I held something that's called a delegated credit authority, which actually allowed me to approve the deals. So it was part relationship manager role, but part credit manager role as well. So I held both caps. So during the course of that year, I was having conversations with some other brokers who were really interested in having me on board. Now, this had already been on my mind for a couple of years. So I would say the year prior to that, I was thinking about what I'm doing next. And that was one of the options. There were options that involved staying within the bank, but I was considering options outside of the bank. Now, my whole career had been at the bank. So for me at the time, it was a really big move. I look back now and I feel like that would not be as big a move now that I've done it once. I think once you do something once, you feel a lot more comfortable with doing it again. But essentially, I had 3 or 4 offers. I narrowed it down to 2, and I narrowed it down to the 2 who I thought are people that I could really work with. And then essentially what it came down to was work environment and how many people were involved in that work environment. I think coming from such a big organization, it was a little bit on my mind about coming to something that was a lot smaller. And there's nothing wrong with this, but I personally didn't want to walk into an office where it was only one other person or a couple other people. So that work environment and the vibe that's created from having many people in an office, that's what got me over the line. And that's essentially why I chose James and the AS Mortgage Partners group. Because as I said, I narrowed it down to 2 people who I knew I would be able to work with.
I love that story, and I'm so glad that you chose us to partner with. And it's been, you probably know the dates better than me. It's been close to about 15, 16 months now.
Yeah, that's actually about spot on. Yep.
And it's been a pleasure working with you. Now, you have helped so many clients of ours prior to joining us, and then now obviously post, not only clients, but obviously people in your own network. Today, I wanted to specifically talk about a service that we provide at AS Mortgage Partners, which you've done a few of, is actually funding for a business acquisition. So a lot of business owners, as part of their growth strategy, look at either buying a subsidiary company or buying a competitor out. And part of that, not always have they got the ability to pay for those things in cash. So what I wanted to do is just unpack a little bit about lending for business acquisition. So for those that don't know the concept and how it works, so do you want to sort of give us a bit of a rundown on how banks look at lending for business acquisition and sort of the metrics that they consider when someone goes down that path?
I've done a lot of these when my time at NAB and now even joining AS Mortgage Partners, I've done quite a fair few of these. So I'd say there's a few things the bank are going to want to look at. Now, the first one for me is the people buying the business is probably, they're all important, but this one I would say is going to be the most important. They want to know that the people buying this business, most likely they want to see that they've got experience within this field. It's not always absolute must. There are transferable skills from some industries to another that are completely different industries that can work. And it is about how we tell that story to the bank. But preferably, they've been in the industry and they've already been working there and their skills are transferable. That's one of the first things. So the clients themselves, the sponsors, we call it. The next part is, it doesn't always have to be this way as well, but what they've got behind them. So they want to understand the statement of position of the clients. Now, the funding doesn't always need to be property backed. So I just want to make that clear. It's preferable. The bank obviously would like it to be property backed. If the client's got a really strong statement of position though, so assets versus liabilities, and the business itself, the balance sheet of the business itself has a decent balance sheet, there's actual tangible assets there, we could look at a form of lending called unsecured lending. This bank still has security though, but I won't go into too much detail about that. I don't want to bore everybody on the line with that, but we can definitely talk about that one-on-one if there's anyone wants to chat about that. The other one is servicing. So they've got to be able to repay the loan. So we've got to be able to show the bank that you can repay the loan. And we've got to show the bank that you can repay the loan on the policies and metrics that they use. And again, that part I'll go into further detail for people about what I mean by that. But really quickly, the real world rate that you might get on your loan, let's just call it 6.5% to 7.5% on a business loan, typically on a secured business loan, okay? The bank aren't assessing it at that rate. They're actually adding a buffer to that. It's a considerable buffer too. And so they might be adding a 3 to 4% buffer on top of that. So that's what I mean by we got to show them that you can afford the loan the way they look at it. That's generally speaking how we go about putting lending in place for a business acquisition loan. I can think of one for a client we helped really recently as well, just to give that some context. Recently, there was a client who was selling their business, which did concrete polishing. They've been in the industry for quite some time. Now, 2 of the employees were approached to purchase the business. In my opinion, perfect fit. They've already been working in the business for some time, and these boys wanted to take it to the next level. So how I presented that to the bank was exactly that story. Here are 2 employees who've been working there already for some time. They want to take over the business. Here are their positions. Here are the historical financials of that business, which showed that even on the historical financials, they can afford it. But also, the boys are planning to do some things differently. So here is a forecast, because this went from 1 owner running the business to 2, which meant that they could run additional teams to complete concrete polishing. So there was an anticipated uptick in revenue, which resulted in an uptick in the bottom line, in the net profit. So we showed the bank that as well, but I actually told the bank, hey, it actually just works on historical performance without no uptick. So if I think about that, the boys had already been working in this business, the 2 people who bought it, their assets versus liabilities position was fairly decent. They were younger, so, still got time to build. And it's serviced on historical data, but we did provide a forecast to show the bank what they're going to do with the business. Ultimately, bank was happy with this, and the boys now have been running it for the past 2 or 3 months now. They're doing really well. I actually spoke to them last week just to check in. I just wanted to see how they were doing, and they're doing exactly what they said they were going to do. They're running 2 crews, they're smashing out jobs, and they're doing really well. So I'm really excited to see where those boys are in 12 months' time. That's just one example. There's probably another 10 of those I could spiel off. That's pretty much it, Sevan.
Yeah, great story, because in 30 minutes, they're going to be in the boardroom doing some tax planning. So you can join me in that session and say g'day. It's a good story. One of our clients there that you helped. So thank you for that. And I know how much they appreciated the journey of that. Tell us about the broker's role in that, because you talked about forecasting there. You talked about being able to position it to the bank. I think sometimes clients think, oh, you're just a banker. What gets done? So talk about what you had to do there. You're a businessman at the same time, but talk through that element of articulating the value to the bank, why they should lend it. Just give us a little bit deeper as to sort of what you needed to do behind the scenes so that the client can appreciate some of the work that gets done.
I might actually use another client for that example. It might be a bit easier. So recently, I also helped some clients purchase a restaurant that is part of a franchise in a shopping center. And it's really important to point that out that it was in a shopping center. And the reason why that is shopping centers will only accept a tenant where they believe that they're going to be able to deliver and run the business, because shopping center can't just accept anyone, nor can the franchisor either. So franchisor will do checks as well. Now, these two gentlemen had worked in the hospitality industry for quite some time, but what was involved in that was quite a thorough review of the franchise agreement itself. So actually reading that and pulling it apart and pointing out positives in it, but also the risks. And I was actually mainly looking for the risks, identifying the risks and mitigating them up front. Really important. And also the lease agreement. So reading that lease agreement in its entirety, talking about the positives, that's important. But again, finding the risks and mitigating those up front. And so an example of that is the franchise agreement. The term of it didn't align to the lease term itself. So there was misalignment in those terms. The risk there is for the bank is that one is ending sooner than the other. And the bank wants those to line up because the bank is giving a term based on which one ends first, basically. Because this was unsecured debt, they were giving a term aligned to the lease or aligned to the franchise agreement, whichever one ends first. Now, the franchise agreement was ending in 3 years. The lease ended in 5 years. Now, obviously for our client, I wanted the best term possible, which is a 5-year term. There's an issue there. There's a 2-year difference. So I pointed this issue out not only to the bank, but to the clients. And I said to them, we should talk to the franchisor and see if it's possible to get this aligned to the lease term. And ultimately, that's what happened. The franchisor made an amendment to the franchise agreement and made sure that it aligned to the lease term. So I've told the bank what the risk is there. They knew up front, so they didn't have to go digging and diving for it and pointing it out to me. Found it up front so we can get on top of it early, pointed it out to the client so he can talk to the franchisor to get that fixed. And ultimately, the client gets a better term on the loan to be able to pay back that loan with an additional 2 years. So instead of a 3-year term, client's got 5. That's just an example of some of the things that I do in an acquisition. And then also talk about the client's background. And what helps me with that is resumes, CVs, talk about their background, what they've done, why I believe they can run this business, why they believe they can run this business. It's important I believe they can run the business too. Obviously, they believe they can do it because they're coming to me to say, hey, can you help me? But I need to believe they can do it as well. So for me to be able to wholeheartedly back a client, I need to make sure that I believe it's something they can do too. So yeah, there's a bit involved in an acquisition when it comes to presenting it to the bank, telling the story, finding the risks, mitigating the risks up front. Yeah, there's a bit that goes into that. And so we call that, the formal name of that is called a credit memorandum. And we write up a credit memorandum. The start of it's called background. I usually label it background, and I talk probably I would say at least half a page, if not a page, just about the client. And then I move into financial metrics, and then I move into risks, actually pointing them out, and then mitigants. That's the general template of the credit memorandum that I write for these. And that gives you a bit of an idea about what I'm putting forward to the bank.
Yeah, I love that. I actually was in your office when you were going through that franchise agreement. I said, what the hell are you doing? You're like, oh, I'm reading this franchise agreement. I'm like, why the hell are you reading a franchise agreement? Isn't that a lawyer's job? I remember having that conversation with you, and you know me, I'm running around like a headless chook, and we had a very brief chat, and I walked out going, this guy's mad. But how good is that? The service that you provide to a client. Look, I think it shouldn't be your job, technically. I think there should be other people there, but you do your job so well as a banker. This is what people don't realize, that your role isn't just here, get a loan. You're actually doing more than selling a loan. loan, you're actually, or finding the best price. There's more to it than that. And that's why you're part of the team, Ish, because you are an amazing banker that goes beyond. I wanted to sort of talk through what the client can expect in terms of appetite from a bank. So at the moment, we've got a scenario economically, there's some uncertainty. We've gone through post-COVID, inflation, all sorts of things happening. Talk through sort of where people believe or businesses believe there actually is appetite from a banking perspective in being able to borrow money for acquisition, and has currently the economic circumstances changed the view from the banking perspective?
Banks are definitely hungry to do business, that's for sure. It does come down to, I guess, the right client, and it comes down to also how well I put that together, what I was talking about, that credit memorandum, telling the story. Like I said, me believing that the client can actually do it as well, because I'll 100% back. If I believe in that the client can do it, I'm going to 100% back it, right? And it's going to come through in my credit memorandum, in that write-up that I send to the bank. So banks are hungry. They want to do business. They just need to make sure that it makes sense and that it's within their policies and their metrics, etc. So I guess that's the first part. Depending on the industry, the appetite can change. So they're a bit more cautious, for example, with retail and hospitality at the moment. Still doing stuff within this space, like gave the example of the franchise restaurant in a shopping center. So they're definitely still doing stuff in this space. As long as that story makes sense, that the financials make sense. If it's got security, that always helps. If it doesn't, that's okay. Like that franchise restaurant that I did was unsecured, and that was okay. It depends on exactly what the industry as well is. Construction industry as well. There's still appetite there as well, but they are having a bit of a deeper look into completed projects. What's the builder themselves? What's their CV resume? How many projects are on the go? How many are completed? They might have a bit of a deeper look into the balance sheet of the business or businesses, because you find with construction industry, there's usually multiple entities, so multiple companies. Some industries can be a bit more favorable than others as well, but they're just a couple of highlighted industries where there is a bit more of a deeper look at the moment and deeper questioning around. But yeah, look, as an experienced broker and an ex-business banker, I'm pretty well equipped and prepared for that. I know exactly what I'm looking for and how to tell that story, and pretty prepared for how to put that forward to the bank, but also just have really open and honest conversations with the clients about that if it's a more higher risk industry. The good operators are always going to continue to be good operators and will continue to get backing from the banks as well. So yeah, it's not to say that the banks are saying no to those industries. I'm just saying that they're taking a deeper look at some industries at the moment.
My last question for you, Hish, is around advice do you have for small businesses that want to acquire a business through lending? You must see lots of cases where you're like, oh, no, only if you had done this prior to coming to me, or certain steps that they just miss. What are some of the tips that you would give to a small business owner just during that process of, I want to buy this business or acquire it as part of my expansion, or could it just be a standalone person that's looking at acquiring a business through lending? What can they do?
Often I see the decision being made, something has come up, an opportunity, but it's come up quite quickly, and there was no necessarily sort of pre-planning for it a lot earlier. It was on their mind, but not necessarily communicated to their accountant or possibly to myself, a broker. So I would say, though, that the first step is the accountant. So they may be saying to the accountant, hey, look, it's actually on my mind to be purchasing a business within this financial year. That's where I would like to then get involved. Hopefully the accountant talks to me and says, I've got this client that wants to buy a business sometime within this financial year. And I can get involved in a conversation with them early about what that looks like from a lending perspective, looking at the borrowing power as well, talking to them about what is possible in terms of how much can they borrow right now based on their existing business's performance without needing to take into account the new business's performance. Because possibly there might be an opportunity to set them up with the funding a lot earlier. So when the time comes along and there's an opportunity to buy a business, once the due diligence is done, that it is actually a really good buy, that they can go hard and possibly make a cash offer, because I've actually organized the finance for them really early on in the piece, just from their existing businesses' financials. So that, I believe, possibly gives them some buying power if they can make a cash offer there, possibly. Again, once the due diligence has been done, that's very important. The other one I see there sometimes is wanting to purchase a business, but not necessarily having any equity to put in. So what I mean by equity is any cash to put in within the purchase. Generally speaking, the bank would like to see the client putting some cash down. So the banks call this skin in the game. That's what they call it. It's a skin in the game. And so they generally like to see, okay, well, what are you willing to put down? You know, even if it's not property and we're going to do unsecured finance, that's okay. But what are you willing to put in? So to have a conversation with the client early about, okay, that's not a problem. If you want to purchase a business for X amount in this industry, etc., yes, I can help you. You've got the experience, you've got the know-how to do this. I believe you can do it. I reckon I can present this to a bank. Okay, well, how much do you have to put in? Because the bank's going to want to know what you're putting in exactly. So yeah, sometimes I have clients come to me wanting to buy a business, but they actually don't have anything to put in it at all. Not to say that that's done, that they're not going to get help, but it's a lot harder. It really is. So if you're not nothing to put in it at all, that's going to be a lot harder.
Yeah, amazing. Hish, you have been a wonderful addition to our business. You've helped so many people in such a short period of time, and I know they are so thankful. Thank you for helping me at the soccer club, because I'm doing less because you're doing more. Thank you for everything you've done so far. You are a knowledge base that we tap into it along a lot of the time here at Alexander Spencer. I can't wait to see how we grow together and how many people we can help along this journey. And I just want to say thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Sevan.
This is The Bottom Line, a show designed to help Australian businesses succeed. This podcast was produced by accountancy firm Alexander Spencer. At Alexander Spencer, we've been helping business owners realise their goals since 1952, and we play a pivotal role in developing, implementing, and supervising the business goals and strategies of our clients. To find out how we can help your business succeed, head to our website, alexanderspencer.com.au. To make sure you don't miss an episode of The Bottom Line, be sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Sevan Tuna, and we'll be back next episode with more tips to help you transform your business. And that's The Bottom Line.